The bullies broke her sacred chain. Now they'll face her brutal revenge. The sound of metal hitting polished marble echoed through the hallway like a death knell. Sofia Mendez watched in horror as the delicate silver links of her great-grandmother's necklace scattered across the floor of Nosa Senora Academy, each piece catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows. The pendant, a hand-carved medallion of São Jorge that had protected 4 generations of Mendez women, skittered away from her desperate fingers, coming to rest against the designer shoes of the boy who had just destroyed her world. "Oops," Lucas Ferreira said, his voice dripping with mock innocence as he examined his manicured fingernails. "Guess that old thing wasn't as strong as you thought." Sofia's hands trembled as she knelt on the cold floor, gathering the broken pieces while dozens of students stepped around her like she was nothing more than debris in their path. Each fragment she collected felt like gathering the scattered bones of her ancestors. The chain had survived the Atlantic crossing from Portugal in 1892. It had been hidden in her great-grandmother's shoe when the family fled political persecution. It had been blessed by priests in 3 different countries, had witnessed births and deaths, marriages and divorces, triumphs and tragedies. And now it lay in pieces because 3 privileged boys found entertainment in her suffering. What none of them knew, what Sofia had kept hidden beneath her oversized hoodies and quiet demeanor, was that for the past 9 years, she had been training 6 days a week at her cousin Miguel's Combat Sports Academy. 9 years of Muay Thai, 9 years of Krav Maga, 9 years of learning to channel rage into precision, of transforming fear into power. 9 years of her cousin telling her that the greatest warriors were those who chose peace until peace was no longer an option. As her fingers closed around the last visible piece of chain, Sofia Mendez made a decision that would change everything. Peace was no longer an option. The morning had started like any other at Nosa Senora Academy, the elite private school nestled in the hills of Belo Vista, where the children of São Paulo's wealthy families received educations that cost more than most people earned in a year. Sofia had transferred here 4 months ago when her mother, Dr. Isabel Mendez, had been recruited to head the cardiology department at Hospital Santa Helena. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for better opportunities, a doorway to a brighter future. Instead, it had become a daily gauntlet of humiliation and isolation. At 5 feet 2 inches, with her father's indigenous features and her mother's Portuguese coloring, Sofia possessed a unique beauty that she deliberately obscured with baggy clothes and downcast eyes. She had learned at her previous schools that being noticed rarely led to anything good. But at Nosa Senora, where most students had known each other since kindergarten, and where family names carried weight that transcended mere wealth, being invisible proved impossible. The targeting had begun subtly. During her first week, she had accidentally walked through a door that Lucas Ferreira was approaching from the other side. The collision was minor, barely enough to spill the artisanal coffee he'd been carrying, but his reaction had been volcanic. Lucas stood 6 feet tall with the kind of athletic build that came from private tennis lessons and weekend yacht trips. His father owned the largest construction company in the state, and Lucas wore his privilege like armor, secure in the knowledge that consequences were for other people. "Watch where you're going," he had snarled, his hazel eyes narrowing as he took in her second-hand uniform and the careful way she held herself, like someone trying not to take up space. "Do you have any idea how much this shirt costs?" Sofia had apologized immediately, offering to pay for cleaning, but Lucas had already identified her as prey. By the end of that first week, he had recruited his inner circle to the hunt. There was Tiago Moreira, 6 feet 3 and built like a professional rugby player, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels throughout Brazil. Despite his intimidating size, Tiago possessed a peculiar cruelty that manifested in psychological warfare rather than physical intimidation. He was the one who started the Whisper campaigns, who ensured that every embarrassing moment was witnessed by the maximum number of people. Then there was Rafael Costa, shorter than his friends at 5'9", but making up for it with a viciousness that seemed to emanate from some deep well of personal dissatisfaction. His mother was a federal judge, his father a media mogul, and Rafael himself was a study in contradictions. Brilliant in the classroom but emotionally stunted, capable of great charm when it served his purposes, but utterly devoid of genuine empathy. Together, the three of them had made Sophia's life a carefully orchestrated hell. It started with small things: a foot extended to trip her in the hallway, books knocked from her arms, subtle shoulder checks that sent her stumbling into walls. They timed their harassment for maximum impact, arriving at her locker just as she needed to retrieve books for class, positioning themselves at her usual lunch table so she had to find somewhere else to sit, creating obstacles in every pathway she tried to navigate through her school day. The psychological torture was worse than the physical intimidation. Tiago had somehow obtained her class schedule and made sure that rumors preceded her to every room. By the end of her first month, everyone knew that Sophia was supposedly on a scholarship. She wasn't. That her mother had been fired from her previous position, also untrue, and that she had been expelled from her last school for stealing, a complete fabrication. The lies took root in the fertile soil of adolescent gossip, growing and mutating until even Sophia sometimes wondered if there was some kernel of truth she had forgotten. Raphael specialized in public humiliation. He would wait until the cafeteria was at its most crowded, then walk past her table and accidentally knock over her water bottle, forcing her to clean up the mess while hundreds of students watched. During physical education, he would loudly comment on her second-hand athletic shoes, wondering aloud if the school had a charity program he hadn't heard about. In group projects, he would ensure she was excluded, telling teachers that she wasn't pulling her weight while simultaneously preventing her from contributing. But it was Lucas who orchestrated everything, who turned bullying into an art form. He never touched her directly. He was too smart for that. But he created situations where contact was inevitable. He would stand too close in hallways, forcing her to squeeze past him. He would position his expensive backpack where she would trip over it, then berate her for her clumsiness. He would speak about her as if she wasn't there, even when she was standing right beside him, discussing her appearance and speculating about her background with his friends while she was forced to listen. Sophia endured it all with a patience that would have impressed Buddhist monks. Every morning, she would touch her great-grandmother's chain and remind herself of the women who had worn it before her. Her bisavó Maria, who had raised 8 children alone after her husband died in a factory accident. Her avó Lucia, who had built a successful seamstress business from nothing, despite never learning to read. Her mother, Isabel, who had worked 3 jobs to put herself through medical school while raising Sophia alone after her father's death. The chain was more than jewelry. It was a tangible connection to a legacy of survival, of women who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious through sheer force of will. When Lucas made snide comments about her clothes, she would finger the chain and remember her great-grandmother wearing the same dress for 5 years during the Depression. When Raphael mocked her quiet nature, she would touch the pendant and recall her grandmother's words. "Silence is not weakness, minha querida. The river that runs deepest makes the least noise." Her mother noticed the changes, of course. Isabel Mendez hadn't become one of São Paulo's most respected cardiologists by missing details. She saw the way Sophia's shoulders tensed when she talked about school, noticed the careful way her daughter navigated around certain topics, observed the increasing frequency with which Sophia retreated to her room immediately after returning home. "How was school today, meu amor?" Isabel would ask during their evening meals, studying her daughter's face with the same intensity she brought to reading EKGs. "Fine, Mai, just busy with studies," Sophia would respond, pushing food around her plate while her mind replayed the day's humiliations. Isabel wasn't fooled, but she also understood the delicate balance of teenage pride. She had been young once, had navigated her own share of cruel classmates and social hierarchies. She made sure Sophia knew she was available to talk, that no problem was too big or too small to share, but she didn't push. She trusted her daughter's strength, perhaps more than she should have. The only place Sophia found peace was at her cousin Miguel's gym, Guerreros Athletics Academy. Located in a converted warehouse in the industrial district, it was a world away from Nosa Senora's manicured lawns and marble facades. The gym smelled of sweat and determination. its walls covered with photographs of fighters who had trained there, some of whom had gone on to professional careers in mixed martial arts. Miguel Mendez was Isabel's nephew, 10 years older than Sofia and built like a lightweight fighter, lean, quick, and deceptively powerful. He had been Brazil's national Muay Thai champion 3 times before a knee injury ended his competitive career. Now he channeled his passion into teaching, running programs for everyone from professional fighters to children learning self-defense. Sofia had started training with Miguel when she was 8, shortly after her father's death in a car accident. Isabel had thought it would be good for her daughter to have a positive male influence, and Miguel had embraced the role of protective older brother with enthusiasm. What had begun as basic self-defense lessons had evolved into comprehensive combat training as Sofia showed both aptitude and dedication that surprised everyone, including herself. "You have the heart of a warrior," Miguel would tell her after particularly intense training sessions. "But remember, Pequena, the greatest warriors are those who win without fighting. Violence should always be the last option, used only when all other paths are closed." Sofia took these lessons to heart, applying them not just to her physical training, but to her philosophy of life. She learned to read body language, to de-escalate confrontations, to project confidence without aggression. She became proficient in multiple martial arts: Muay Thai for striking, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for groundwork, Krav Maga for practical self-defense. But more importantly, she learned control over her body, her emotions, and her reactions. 3 times a week, she would spend 3 hours at the gym, working through combinations on heavy bags, sparring with partners twice her size, drilling techniques until they became as natural as breathing. The other students at the gym, a mix of professional fighters, law enforcement officers, and regular people learning self-defense, treated her with the respect earned through sweat and dedication. Here, it didn't matter that her uniform was second-hand or that her family name didn't appear on hospital wings. What mattered was showing up, working hard, and supporting your training partners. On weekends, Miguel would give her private lessons, pushing her harder than the regular classes allowed. They would work on advanced techniques, on strategy and tactics, on the mental aspects of combat that separated good fighters from great ones. "Fighting is like chess," he would explain while they worked through different scenarios. "You must think 3 moves ahead, anticipate your opponent's reactions, create opportunities while defending against attacks. But unlike chess, you must do all of this in fractions of seconds, while under physical and emotional stress." Sofia absorbed these lessons with the same intensity she brought to her academic studies. She learned to compartmentalize pain, to maintain calm under pressure, to find stillness in the center of chaos. She discovered that she had a natural gift for reading opponents, for identifying weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. Her small size, initially seen as a disadvantage, became an asset as she learned to use leverage and timing to defeat larger, stronger opponents. But perhaps the most important lesson Miguel taught her was about purpose. "Never fight from anger," he would say. "Anger makes you stupid, makes you predictable. Fight from purpose, from necessity, from love of what you're protecting. That's when you become truly dangerous." At Nosa Senora Academy, no one suspected that the quiet girl who ate lunch alone possessed the skills to dismantle them in seconds. Sofia was careful to maintain her cover, never showing the strength she had developed through years of training, never letting her true capabilities surface. She walked with the same hesitant gait, kept her eyes downcast, allowed her shoulders to hunch in the submissive posture that marked her as prey. The disconnect between her 2 lives grew more pronounced as the bullying intensified. At school, she was a victim, enduring daily humiliation with apparent helplessness. At the gym, she was a force to be reckoned with, holding her own against fighters who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. The cognitive dissonance might have driven someone else to madness, but Sofia found a strange peace in the duality. She knew who she really was. The opinions of Lucas and his crew were as meaningless as the barking of dogs. As October arrived, bringing with it the humid heat that preceded São Paulo's rainy season, the harassment escalated to new levels. Lucas seemed to have made it his personal mission to break her spirit completely. He would arrive early to stake out her locker, ensuring that her first interaction of each day was with him and his mockery. He recruited other students to his cause, turning Sophia's isolation from a consequence of being new into an active campaign of social exile. The teachers, when they noticed anything at all, dismissed it as typical teenage dynamics. Nosa Senora Academy prided itself on producing future leaders, and leadership, in their view, sometimes required a certain ruthlessness. As long as grades remained high and no one was physically injured, the administration preferred to let students sort out their own social hierarchies. Sophia's mother began to notice more concrete signs of distress. Her daughter was losing weight, dark circles appeared under her eyes from sleepless nights, and she started finding excuses to miss school. Mysterious stomach aches, headaches, sudden onset flu symptoms that disappeared as quickly as they came. "Sophia," Isabel said one evening, sitting on her daughter's bed while Sophia pretended to focus on homework. "Whatever is happening, you don't have to face it alone. I know transferring schools is hard, but—" "It's fine, Mai," Sophia interrupted, not meeting her mother's eyes. "Just adjustment issues. It'll get better." Isabel wanted to push, but she recognized the stubborn set of her daughter's jaw, the same expression she herself wore when facing difficult situations. She kissed Sophia's forehead and left the room, but not before making a mental note to speak with the school counselor. The breaking point came on an unseasonably warm Tuesday in late October. Sophia had arrived at school earlier than usual, hoping to avoid the morning gauntlet at her locker. She needed to retrieve her advanced calculus textbook for first period, and Ms. Yamamoto didn't accept excuses for missing materials. The hallway was mostly empty, just a few students from the orchestra practicing in distant rooms, and the custodial staff finishing their morning rounds. She should have known better. Should have recognized the setup when she saw the hallway was too empty, too quiet. But hope, that dangerous emotion that makes people ignore obvious warning signs, made her believe that maybe, just this once, she could have a normal morning. She was working the combination on her locker when she heard footsteps approaching. 3 sets, perfectly synchronized, like predators who had hunted together so long they moved as one unit. Her fingers stilled on the lock, her body automatically shifting into a defensive posture before she forced herself back into the submissive stance they expected. "Well, well, well." Lucas's voice carried down the hallway like the hiss of a snake. "Look who's trying to avoid us. That's not very friendly, is it?" Sophia didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge them. She continued working her combination, hoping against hope that they would get bored and move on. But she felt them closing in, forming a semicircle that trapped her against the lockers. "I'm talking to you," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It's rude not to respond when someone's speaking to you. Didn't your mother teach you any manners? Or was she too busy cleaning houses to bother?" The insult to her mother made Sophia's hands clench, but she maintained her control. She finally opened her locker and reached for her textbook, trying to project an air of indifference that she didn't feel. That's when she felt the hand on her shoulder, Tiago's massive palm pressing down with enough force to hurt without leaving marks. "Lucas asked you a question," he rumbled, his breath hot against her ear. "I need to get to class," Sophia said quietly, trying to shrug off his hand. "Class doesn't start for 20 minutes, Raphael observed, checking his designer watch with theatrical precision. "Plenty of time for a conversation about manners." Sophia turned slowly, her back pressed against the lockers, facing her tormentors for the first time that morning. Lucas stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. Tiago loomed to his right, his bulk blocking any escape route. Raphael leaned casually against the opposite wall, recording everything on his phone for later entertainment. "There she is," Lucas said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Now what do we say when someone greets us?" Sophia remained silent, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her great-grandmother's chain through her shirt. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. "Still wearing that old thing?" Lucas asked, his eyes tracking the movement. "I'm surprised it hasn't fallen apart yet. Must be held together with prayers and desperation." "Leave me alone," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was that?" Lucas leaned closer, cupping his ear theatrically. "I couldn't quite hear you." "You'll have to speak up if you want to be heard. Though honestly, I don't know why you'd bother. It's not like anyone cares what you have to say." The cruelty was so casual, so practiced, that it might have been a rehearsed performance. And perhaps it was. 3 boys who had turned tormenting others into a form of entertainment, a bonding exercise that reinforced their position at the top of the social hierarchy. "Please," Sophia said, hating herself for the pleading tone, but knowing that sometimes submission was the fastest way to end these encounters. "I just need to get my books." "Please," Tiago mimicked in a high-pitched voice. So polite, so pathetic. That's when Lucas's eyes fixed on the thin silver chain visible at Sophia's collar. His expression shifted, a new cruelty dawning in his features. "You know what? I'm tired of seeing that ugly piece of junk every day. It's bringing down the whole aesthetic of the school." Before Sophia could react, his hand shot forward, fingers hooking under the chain and yanking with violent force. The 90-year-old links, worn thin by generations of wear, snapped instantly. The sound was like gunfire in Sophia's ears, like the world breaking apart at its foundations. Time seemed to slow as she watched the chain fragment, links scattering across the polished floor like silver tears. The pendant, that precious medallion of San Jorge that had protected her family through war and poverty, through dictatorship and democracy, through joy and sorrow, flew from the broken chain and skittered across the hallway, coming to rest against a distant wall. "Oops," Lucas said, examining the broken links still tangled in his fingers. "Guess it wasn't as strong as you thought. Just like everything else about you, weak, fragile, and ultimately worthless." Sophia dropped to her knees, her hands scrambling to gather the scattered pieces. Each fragment she collected felt like gathering pieces of her own shattered heart. She could hear the boys laughing above her, hear Raphael's phone camera clicking as he documented her humiliation, hear other students beginning to arrive and witness her complete degradation. "Look at her," Tiago said loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Crawling on the floor like an animal. This is where she belongs. Maybe we should help her," Raphael suggested with false concern. He took a step forward and deliberately stepped on one of the chain links, grinding it under his designer shoe until the soft silver bent beyond repair. "Oops, guess I made it worse." Sophia's hands stilled. Something inside her, some last restraint that had held her back for months, finally snapped with the same finality as her grandmother's chain. She could feel the change happening, feel the careful mask she had worn for so long beginning to crack. Years of training, years of discipline, years of control, all overridden by a rage so pure it felt like fire in her veins. She stood slowly, the broken pieces of chain clutched in her fist. When she raised her eyes to meet Lucas's, he actually took a step backward. The meek, submissive girl they had tormented for months was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely. Someone whose eyes held the kind of focused intensity that predators recognized instinctively. "You have no idea what you just did," Sophia said, her voice carrying a quality that made the hallway fall silent despite the growing crowd of students. Lucas tried to recover his bravado, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "What's the matter? Going to cry about your broken necklace? Going to run to mommy?" "No," Sophia said simply. "I'm going to give you a choice. Thursday morning, 7:30, the old gymnasium. Just the 4 of us. We settle this properly." "Settle what?" Tiago scoffed, though his usual confidence seemed shaken by Sophia's transformation. "You think you're going to fight us?" "All 3 of us." Sophia smiled, and several students in the watching crowd stepped back unconsciously. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had made a decision and found peace in its certainty. "I'm not asking you to come," she said. "I'm telling you. Thursday morning, 7:30. Be there, or I'll find you anyway. And trust me, you want this to happen on my terms, not yours." "You're insane," Raphael said, but his voice lacked its usual mocking tone. "You can't seriously think—" "Thursday," Sophia interrupted. 7:30. Old gymnasium. She turned and walked away, leaving the broken chain scattered on the floor behind her. The crowd parted to let her pass, students pressing against lockers to avoid any contact with this strange new version of their former victim. Behind her, she could hear the three boys trying to reassert their dominance, making jokes and dismissive comments, but the laughter from their audience was nervous rather than genuine. The rest of Tuesday passed in a surreal haze. Word of the confrontation spread through Nosa Senora Academy like wildfire, growing and mutating with each retelling. By lunch, everyone knew that something had fundamentally changed, though no one could quite articulate what. Sophia moved through her classes with a calm that unnerved students and teachers alike. She took notes, answered questions when called upon, completed assignments with her usual precision. But there was something different about her presence, an energy that made people unconsciously give her more space, that made conversations halt when she entered a room. That evening, she went to the gym as usual, but Miguel immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. She attacked the heavy bag with an intensity that made him intervene after just a few minutes. "What happened?" he asked, steadying the bag she had been punishing. Sophia looked at him for a long moment, then told him everything. About the months of bullying, about the daily humiliation, about the broken chain. Miguel listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You know I have to tell you not to do this. I know. Fighting at school could get you expelled, could ruin your future. I know. Your mother would be devastated if something happened to you. I know." Miguel studied his cousin's face, seeing in it the same determination that had carried their family through generations of struggle. "But you're going to do it anyway." "They broke Bisavo Maria's chain," Sophia said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Miguel sighed deeply. "Then we'd better make sure you're ready. Come on, let's work on your combinations. If you're going to do this, you're going to do it right." They trained for 3 hours, working through scenarios, practicing techniques specifically designed for multiple opponents. Miguel pushed her harder than ever before, testing her endurance, her flexibility, her ability to maintain focus under extreme stress. By the end of the session, Sophia was drenched in sweat, but moving with a fluid grace that would have been beautiful if it weren't so potentially devastating. "Remember," Miguel said as she prepared to leave, "control, always control. You're not trying to destroy them, just to make a point." "What if control isn't possible?" Sophia asked. "It's always possible," Miguel replied. "That's what separates us from them. We choose how far to go. We choose when to stop. That's what makes us warriors instead of thugs." Wednesday arrived gray and oppressive, with clouds that hung low over São Paulo like a premonition. Sophia arrived at school to find the atmosphere changed completely. Students who had previously ignored her now watched her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The story of Tuesday's confrontation had grown in the telling, becoming something almost mythical. Some versions had her threatening the boys with death. Others claimed she had demonstrated some kind of martial arts move that left them terrified. A few insisted she had undergone some kind of psychotic break and should be avoided at all costs. Lucas, Tiago, and Rafael maintained their usual positions at the top of the social hierarchy, but there was something forced about their confidence. They laughed too loudly at their own jokes, pushed younger students with unnecessary aggression, and seemed to be constantly checking over their shoulders. When they encountered Sophia in the hallways, they made a show of dismissing her with contempt, but they also maintained a careful distance. "The mouse thinks she's become a lion," Lucas announced loudly when they passed in the main corridor, ensuring maximum audience for his performance. "Thursday morning, we'll remind her that she's still just prey." But Sophia noticed that his hands were clenched into fists, that Tiago's usual swagger seemed forced, that Rafael wasn't recording their interactions anymore. They were worried, even if they wouldn't admit it to themselves or anyone else. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Sophia's last class. The school counselor, Miss Patricia Kusama, appeared in the doorway and quietly requested that Sophia accompany her to her office. The walk through the empty hallways was silent, but Sophia could feel Ms. Kusama studying her with the kind of professional assessment that came from years of working with troubled teenagers. The counselor's office was a carefully constructed safe space with soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and walls covered with motivational posters and student artwork. Miss Kusama, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair, gestured for Sophia to sit before taking her own seat behind a desk, deliberately positioned to avoid creating barriers. "Sophia," she began gently, "I've heard some concerning things about an incident yesterday. Would you like to talk about it?" "No," Sophia replied simply. Miss Kusama nodded, as if she had expected this response. "I understand that adjusting to a new school can be challenging, especially one as particular as Nosa Senora. But threatening other students isn't the answer to social difficulties." "I didn't threaten anyone," Sophia said calmly. "I invited them to a meeting that several students have described as a fight challenge." Sophia remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the characterization. Miss Kusama leaned forward slightly. "Sophia, I've reviewed your records from your previous school. Excellent grades, no disciplinary issues, glowing recommendations from teachers. This behavior seems very out of character." "People change," Sophia observed. "Yes, they do. Usually in response to external pressures. Has someone been bothering you, making you feel unwelcome?" For a moment, Sophia considered telling the truth, considered describing months of torment, of daily humiliation, of 3 boys who had made her life a carefully orchestrated hell. But she knew how it would go: investigations that went nowhere, punishments that would only make things worse, a system designed to protect those with power while offering empty platitudes to their victims. "No," she said. "Everything's fine." Miss Kusama studied her for a long moment. "Sophia, if something is happening tomorrow morning that could result in someone getting hurt, including yourself, I need to know about it." "Nothing's going to happen that hasn't been earned," Sophia replied, meeting the counselor's eyes directly. The ambiguity of the statement clearly troubled Miss Kusama, but without more concrete information, she was limited in her options. "I'm going to notify security to check the old gymnasium tomorrow morning," she said finally. "And I'm calling your mother to discuss my concerns." Sophia nodded, unsurprised. She had expected this, had factored it into her planning. "That's your right." "Sophia," Miss Kusama said as the student rose to leave, "whatever you're planning, it's not worth risking your future. You're a brilliant young woman with unlimited potential. Don't throw it away for a moment of whatever this is." "Sometimes," Sophia said, pausing at the door, "the future isn't worth having if you can't respect yourself in the present." That evening, the conversation with her mother was more difficult than any training session. Isabel had received Miss Kusama's call and was waiting when Sophia arrived home, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "What's happening at school, mi amor?" she asked without preamble. "The counselor said something about a fight?" Sophia sat across from her mother at their small kitchen table, the same table where they had shared thousands of meals, where homework had been completed and tears had been shed and dreams had been discussed. She looked at this woman who had sacrificed so much, who had worked impossible hours to provide opportunities, who had loved unconditionally, even when life gave her every reason to become bitter. "They broke Bisavo Maria's chain," Sophia said quietly. Isabel's expression shifted immediately. She knew the significance of the chain, understood what it represented to their family. "Who?" she asked, her professional calm replaced by maternal fury. Sophia told her everything, not just about the chain, but about the months of bullying, the daily humiliation, the systematic campaign to break her spirit. She watched her mother's face cycle through emotions, anger, guilt, sorrow, rage, before settling into something that looked like understanding. "Why didn't you tell me?" Isabel asked, though her tone held no accusation. "Because you would have tried to fix it," Sophia replied. "And some things can't be fixed from the outside. Some things have to be resolved between the people involved. And this resolution, tomorrow morning, is necessary." Isabel was quiet for a long time, studying her daughter's face as if seeing her for the first time. "Your father would have been proud of you," she said finally. He always said you had the heart of a warrior. But Sophia, violence isn't the answer. I know, but sometimes it's the only language certain people understand. I've tried everything else. I've been patient. I've been submissive. I've turned the other cheek until I have no cheeks left to turn. They broke our chain. They broke the thing that connected me to all the women who came before me, who survived things these boys couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. Isabel reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. The chain was just metal, meu amor. What it represented, that lives inside you. It can't be broken by anyone. I know, Sophia said. And tomorrow, they'll know it too. Isabel squeezed her hands tighter. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't go too far. I promise I'll only go as far as necessary. It wasn't quite the assurance Isabel wanted, but she recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes. It was the same determination that had carried her through medical school, that had helped her rebuild their lives after her husband's death, that had been passed down through generations of Mendez women who refused to be broken by circumstances. Then I'll pray for you, Isabel said, and for them, because they have no idea what they've awakened. That night, Sophia barely slept. She lay in bed running through techniques in her mind, visualizing different scenarios, preparing for every possibility. The broken chain sat in a small wooden box on her nightstand, its pieces catching moonlight through her window. She thought about her great-grandmother, about the stories passed down through generations. Maria Mendez had been tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but she had faced down soldiers who came to take her sons for a war they didn't believe in. She had stood in her doorway with nothing but determination and refused to let them pass. The soldiers, faced with the absolute certainty in this small woman's eyes, had actually retreated. Give me your strength, Bisavo, Sophia whispered to the darkness. Help me honor our name. Thursday morning arrived with unusual clarity, the previous day's oppressive clouds having given way to crystal blue skies. Sophia woke at 5:30, her body automatically preparing for what was to come. She went through her morning routine with methodical precision: shower, breakfast, stretching exercises that had become as natural as breathing. She dressed carefully, choosing athletic wear that would allow for maximum movement while still meeting school dress codes. She pulled her hair back in a tight braid that couldn't be grabbed easily, removed all jewelry that could become a liability, and applied only enough makeup to avoid looking noticeably different from usual. Her mother was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. They looked at each other for a long moment, all the things that needed to be said passing between them in silence. I'll be at the hospital, Isabel said finally. Call me when it's over. I will. Sophia? Her mother called as she reached the door. Lembra quem você é. Remember who you are. Sempre, mãe. Always, Mom. The drive to school was surreal in its normalcy. The same streets she traveled every day, the same morning traffic, the same street vendors setting up their stalls. But Sophia felt as if she was seeing it all from a great distance, as if she had already stepped outside the normal flow of life into something more primal, more essential. She arrived at Nosa Senora Academy at 7:15, parking in the nearly empty lot and making her way to the old gymnasium. This building, a relic from the school's earlier days, was rarely used anymore except for storage and occasional overflow activities. It sat apart from the main campus, surrounded by trees that had grown wild without proper maintenance. The perfect location for what was about to occur. The gymnasium door was unlocked. Someone, probably one of the boys, had made sure of that. Sophia entered the space and was immediately struck by memories of similar places where she had trained and competed. The same high ceilings that made every sound echo, the same polished wood floors that could be either friend or enemy depending on your footwork, the same smell of old sweat and determination that seemed to permeate such spaces. She moved to the center of the gymnasium and began her warm-up routine. First, joint rotations to ensure everything was loose and ready. Then dynamic stretching, her body flowing through movements that were part dance, part combat preparation. Finally, shadow boxing, her fists cutting through air as she visualized opponents, practiced combinations, prepared her mind for the violence to come. At exactly 7:30, the main doors opened. Lucas entered first, his usual swagger somewhat diminished, but his chin raised in defiance. Tiago followed, his massive frame filling the doorway before he stepped aside to let Raphael enter. They were dressed in what passed for athletic wear among the wealthy, designer tracksuits that had probably never seen actual athletic activity, expensive sneakers that prioritized style over function. They approached slowly, spreading out in a semicircle that revealed they had at least discussed basic tactics. Sophia remained in the center of the gym, watching them with the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty. "So you actually showed up," Lucas said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I'm impressed. Stupid, but impressed." "We tried to talk her out of it," Tiago added, cracking his knuckles in what he probably thought was an intimidating gesture. "Told her she was making a mistake. But some people have to learn the hard way." Raphael had his phone out, recording as always. "This is going to be the shortest fight in history," he narrated for his future audience. 3 against 1, and the one is half our size." Sophia said nothing, simply watching them, reading their body language, noting their positions. Lucas was the leader, but also the most uncertain, his confidence a facade that would crumble under pressure. Tiago was the physical threat, but moved with the awkwardness of someone who had never really learned to use his size effectively. Raphael was the wild card, unpredictable but also the most likely to panic when things went wrong. "Before we begin," Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly through the space, "I want you to understand something. This isn't about the chain, not really. It's about choices. You chose to make my life hell. You chose to hurt me for your entertainment. You chose to break something precious to me. And now, you get to experience the consequences of those choices." "Consequences?" Lucas laughed, but the sound was forced. "The only consequence here is you getting hurt. Last chance to apologize and walk away." "I'm not the one who needs to apologize," Sophia replied, beginning to move in a slow circle that forced them to adjust their positions. "But you will be." "Enough talking," Tiago growled, stepping forward with his fists raised. "Let's get this over with." Sophia smiled, and all 3 boys suddenly understood that they had made a terrible miscalculation. What happened next would be debated and discussed at Nosa Senora Academy for years to come. Those who claimed to have witnessed it through the gymnasium's high windows would tell increasingly elaborate versions, each more fantastic than the last. But the truth was both simpler and more remarkable than any of the stories that followed. Tiago rushed forward with the graceless aggression of someone who had always relied on size to win confrontations. His haymaker punch telegraphed its arrival from so far away that Sophia could have written a letter in the time it took to arrive. She slipped under it with liquid grace, her body moving in ways that seemed to defy physics. As his momentum carried him past her, she executed a perfect foot sweep that sent all 6 feet 3 inches and 200 pounds of him crashing to the floor with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. Raphael, seeing his friend fall, reacted with panic rather than strategy. He dropped his phone and rushed at Sophia from behind, apparently forgetting that she had been watching their positions the entire time. She pivoted on one foot, using his own momentum against him, and guided him face first into Tiago, who was just struggling to his knees. Both boys went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. Lucas, to his credit, tried to be smarter. He circled carefully, looking for an opening, trying to use his reach advantage. But Sophia had been training against opponents with reach advantages for 9 years. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, got inside his guard, and demonstrated a combination that Miguel had drilled into her thousands of times. Solar plexus, liver, step back, roundhouse to the thigh. Lucas folded like a broken chair, his body trying to protect everything at once and succeeding at protecting nothing. The entire exchange had taken less than 30 seconds. "Get up," Sophia said calmly, stepping back to give them room. "We're not done." Tiago struggled to his feet, his face red with exertion and embarrassment. "You got lucky," he gasped. "Then let's see if I get lucky again," Sophia replied. This time they tried to coordinate, approaching from 3 different angles simultaneously. It was a better strategy, but executed by people who had no experience working as a team in combat. Sophia became a blur of motion, using one attacker to block another, creating collisions and confusion, turning their numerical advantage into a liability. She flowed between them like water, never where they expected her to be, always one step ahead of their clumsy attempts at coordination. When Tiago tried to grab her, she used his grip as a pivot point, swinging around him to deliver a knee to Raphael's midsection. When Lucas attempted to flank her, she rolled backward, causing him to stumble over his own friends. When Raphael recovered and threw a desperate punch, she redirected it into Tiago's shoulder. It was, in its way, beautiful. A demonstration of martial arts, as expression, as the physical manifestation of years of discipline and training. But it was also devastating in its efficiency. Each strike was precisely calculated to cause maximum discomfort with minimum actual damage. Each takedown was designed to humiliate rather than injure. Each counter was a lesson in the vast gulf between real fighting skill and the illusion of toughness. After 5 minutes, all 3 boys were on the ground again, gasping for breath, covered in sweat, beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation. "Do you want to continue?" Sophia asked, not even breathing heavily. "Because I can do this all day. 9 years of training, 6 days a week, 3 hours a day. This is literally easier than my usual workout." "How?" Lucas wheezed from his position on the floor. "How are you doing this?" Sophia crouched down so they were at eye level. "The same way my great-grandmother stood up to soldiers. The same way my grandmother built a business from nothing. The same way my mother became a doctor despite every obstacle. We survive, we endure, we overcome. And when someone tries to break us, we show them what strength really looks like." She stood and walked to where Raphael's phone had fallen, still recording. She picked it up and spoke directly to the camera. "To anyone watching this, what you're seeing is what happens when bullies encounter someone who won't be bullied anymore. These 3 thought they were powerful because they could hurt someone who wouldn't fight back. They thought breaking my grandmother's chain would break me. They were wrong." She set the phone down carefully, making sure it captured what came next. "Now," she said, returning to stand over the 3 boys, "we're going to discuss the new rules. First, the bullying stops. Not just of me, but of everyone. I'll be watching, and if I hear about any of you targeting another student, we'll have another session like this one, but I won't be as gentle." "Gentle?" Tiago croaked. "You call this gentle? You're conscious, aren't you? Nothing's broken? You'll be walking out of here on your own feet?" "Yes, this was gentle. This was me holding back about 90%. You don't want to see the other 10%. She began pacing, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher delivering a lesson. "Second, you're going to use your positions, your influence, your resources to make this school better for everyone. Start anti-bullying initiatives. Stand up for kids who can't stand up for themselves. Be the leaders you pretend to be instead of the thugs you actually are." "You can't just—" Lucas started. "I can and I am," Sophia interrupted. "Unless you'd prefer I share this video with the entire school. Show everyone how easily 3 of you were handled by one girl half your size. I'm sure that would do wonders for your reputations." The threat hung in the air like a sword. At Nosa Senora Academy, reputation was everything. The social hierarchy that gave them power was also a prison. Any sign of weakness, any crack in their armor, and they would be devoured by those eager to take their places. "Third," Sophia continued, "you're going to pay for my grandmother's chain to be repaired. I know it won't be the same, but you're going to pay for the best jeweler in São Paulo to restore it as much as possible." "Fine," Lucas muttered. "And finally," Sophia said, her voice softening slightly, "you're going to think about why you became the kind of people who take pleasure in others' pain. Because that's not strength, it's not power. It's weakness dressed up in expensive clothes. Real strength is using your advantages to lift others up, not tear them down." She stepped back, giving them room to stand. One by one, they struggled to their feet, their designer tracksuits now rumpled and stained with sweat. They looked smaller somehow, as if the beating had stripped away more than just their physical confidence. "We're done here," Sophia said. "But remember, I'll be watching. And if you forget this lesson, I'll be happy to provide a refresher course." She turned and walked toward the exit, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Lucas. My mother isn't a house cleaner. She's the head of cardiology at Santa Helena Hospital. She saves lives every day. What does your father do again? Build overpriced apartments?" The door closed behind her with a quiet click that echoed through the gymnasium like a final punctuation mark. The aftermath of the Thursday morning confrontation rippled through Nosa Senora Academy like a stone dropped in still water. The video, which Raphael had somehow been convinced to delete, existed only in memory and rumor, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some versions had Sophia defeating the boys without being touched. Others claimed she had revealed superhuman abilities. A few insisted the entire thing was an elaborate hoax, that no one could really defeat 3 opponents simultaneously. But the evidence was undeniable. Lucas, Tiago, and Raphael moved through the halls differently now. Their swagger replaced by something more subdued, their casual cruelty conspicuously absent. They still maintained their positions in the social hierarchy, but the sharp edges had been worn away, replaced by something that might have been mistaken for actual leadership. The change was most noticeable in Lucas. Within a week of the confrontation, he had approached the student council about starting an anti-bullying campaign. When asked about his sudden interest in student welfare, he simply said he had realized that true strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the initiative was genuine enough that it gained administrative support. Tiago channeled his energy into the school's athletics program, volunteering to help train younger students who showed interest but lacked confidence. His size, once used for intimidation, became a source of encouragement as he helped smaller kids understand that physical presence meant nothing without discipline and technique. He never mentioned why he had gained this insight, but those who knew him before noticed the transformation. Raphael's change was perhaps the most dramatic. He stopped recording others' humiliation and started using his technical skills for positive purposes. He created an anonymous reporting system for bullying incidents, designed a website celebrating student achievements regardless of social status, and began tutoring younger students in computer science. When asked about his change of heart, he would only say that he had learned the importance of building rather than destroying. Sophia watched these changes with satisfaction, but without gloating. She had made her point, delivered her lesson, and now focused on her own life. The broken chain had been taken to São Paulo's finest jeweler, who had marveled at its age and craftsmanship before carefully restoring it as much as possible. It would never be quite the same. Some breaks can't be completely healed, but it was whole again, and Sophia wore it proudly. Her relationship with her mother deepened through shared understanding. Isabel had been right. The chain was just metal, but what it represented lived inside them both. The morning after the confrontation, they had sat together at their kitchen table, sharing stories about the women who had come before them, laughing and crying in equal measure. "Your grandmother would have been proud," Isabel said, touching the restored chain around her daughter's neck. "Not of the fighting, but of standing up for yourself, for refusing to be broken." "I know," Sophia replied. "I felt them with me, all of them. Every woman who wore this chain, who faced impossible odds and survived." At school, Sophia's status had transformed completely. She was no longer invisible, no longer ignored. Students who had previously avoided her now sought her friendship, drawn by the quiet confidence that had replaced her former submission. She was careful with these new relationships, understanding that respect born from fear was different from genuine connection. But she found several kindred spirits who appreciated her for who she was, rather than what she had done. The self-defense club she started met twice a week in the new gymnasium, with Miguel volunteering as guest instructor once a month. The enrollment was diverse: students who had been bullied, those who simply wanted to learn to protect themselves, and surprisingly, Lucas, Tiago, and Raphael, who approached their training with humility and dedication that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. During one session, as Sophia demonstrated a defensive technique, Lucas asked, "Where did you really learn all this?" "So, my cousin's gym," Sophia replied, adjusting his stance. "Guerreros Athletics Academy. I've been training since I was 8. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Tiago asked from where he was practicing with another student. Why let it go on for so long?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "Because fighting is always the last option. My cousin taught me that real strength is knowing when not to fight. I only fight when something worth fighting for is at stake." "Like your grandmother's chain," Raphael said, understanding dawning in his expression. "Like my family's honor," Sophia corrected. "The chain was just the symbol. What you really broke was my patience." As the semester progressed, Nosa Senora Academy underwent a subtle but significant cultural shift. The rigid social hierarchies remained but became more permeable. Acts of casual cruelty that had once been commonplace became rare, quickly addressed by student leaders who had learned that true power came from protection rather than predation. Sophia found herself in an unexpected position of influence, consulted by administrators about student welfare initiatives, asked to mediate conflicts, invited to speak at assemblies about resilience and standing up for oneself. She accepted these responsibilities with the same quiet determination she brought to everything, understanding that with power, even reluctant power, came obligation. 3 months after the gymnasium confrontation, as São Paulo moved into its rainy season, Sophia sat in the cafeteria eating lunch with a diverse group of friends when Lucas approached her table. The cafeteria fell quiet, students watching to see what would happen. "Can I sit?" he asked, and Sophia noticed he was actually requesting permission rather than assuming agreement. She nodded, and he took a seat across from her, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice low but audible to those nearby. "Not for the beating, that sucked, but for what came after, for making me think about who I was becoming." Sophia studied his face, looking for deception but finding what appeared to be sincerity. "People can change," she said simply. "The question is whether they choose to." "I'm trying," Lucas admitted. "It's harder than I thought, breaking old patterns. But I'm trying." "That's all anyone can do," Sophia replied. He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About the chain, about all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to know." Sophia touched the restored chain at her throat. "Apologies don't fix the past," she said, "but they can help build a better future." As Lucas walked away, Sophia's friends erupted in quiet conversation, amazed by the exchange they had just witnessed. But Sophia's mind was elsewhere, thinking about cycles, of violence and redemption, of breaking and healing, of the choices that defined who people became. That evening, she stood in Miguel's gym, working through her forms with the same dedication she had shown for 9 years. But now, there was a difference. She wasn't training to defend herself against specific threats. She was training to maintain the strength that allowed her to protect others, to be the guardian she had needed during those dark months of torment. "You've changed," Miguel observed, watching her flow through a complex combination. "There's a peace in your movements that wasn't there before." "I found my purpose," Sophia replied, never breaking rhythm. "It's not about being strong enough to hurt those who hurt me. It's about being strong enough to stop them from hurting anyone else." Miguel smiled, the expression of a teacher whose student had surpassed their lessons. "That's the difference between a fighter and a warrior," he said. "Fighters win battles, warriors change worlds." As the months turned to years, the story of Sofia Mendez and the broken chain became legend at Nosa Senora Academy. Details were lost and embellished in equal measure, but the core message remained. That strength came in many forms, that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous, and that breaking something precious might awaken something powerful. Sophia graduated with honors, her college applications strengthened by letters of recommendation from teachers who praised her leadership and character. Even Miss Kusama, the counselor who had once worried about her violent tendencies, wrote about her remarkable ability to transform conflict into growth, to turn personal trauma into collective healing. Lucas, Tiago, and Raphael also graduated, their paths forever altered by that Thursday morning in the old gymnasium. Lucas went on to study social work, driven by a desire to help kids who reminded him of who he used to be. Tiago became a physical therapist, using his understanding of bodies and movement to heal rather than harm. Raphael founded a tech company focused on creating platforms for positive social change, his early cruelty transformed into a drive for connection and community. They would occasionally cross paths in the years that followed, these four people whose lives had intersected so violently and transformed so completely. There was never warmth between them. Some wounds leave scars that never fully fade. But there was respect, and perhaps more importantly, there was understanding. Sophia kept training throughout college and beyond, eventually opening her own martial arts school that focused on empowerment through discipline. The restored chain hung in a place of honor in the studio, and she would tell its story to new students, about the women who had worn it, about the day it was broken, about how sometimes destruction could lead to reconstruction stronger than before. Parents would bring their bullied children to her, hoping she could teach them to fight back. But Sophia would explain that fighting was only a small part of what she taught. The real lessons were about respect, for yourself, for others, for the power you developed. She taught them to walk with confidence that didn't require aggression, to speak with authority that didn't need volume, to understand that true strength was not about dominating others, but about refusing to be dominated. One day, nearly a decade after that morning in the gymnasium, a young girl came to Sophia's school. She was small for her age, quiet, with the kind of hunched posture that marked her as a victim. Her mother explained that she was being bullied at school, that they had tried everything, that they didn't know what else to do. Sophia knelt down to the girl's eye level, seeing in her a reflection of her own younger self. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Anna," the girl whispered. "Anna, do you know what this is?" Sophia asked, showing her the chain with its pendant of St. George. Anna shook her head. "This chain belonged to my great-great-grandmother. It was passed down through 5 generations of women in my family. Each of them faced challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. But they survived, and their strength was passed down with this chain." "It's pretty," Anna said softly. "It's more than pretty," Sophia replied. "It's a reminder that we come from survivors, that we have strength in us we haven't discovered yet. When I was about your age, some boys at my school broke this chain. They thought breaking it would break me." "What did you do?" Anna asked, her eyes widening with interest. "First, I got very angry. Then I got very focused. And then I showed them that breaking something precious to me was the worst mistake they could make. But more importantly, I learned that the chain wasn't really what made me strong. The strength was inside me all along. The chain just reminded me to look for it." Sophia stood and extended her hand to Anna. "I can't promise to make the bullying stop overnight, but I can promise to teach you to find your strength, to stand tall even when you're scared, to know that you have the power to change your own story. Are you ready to begin?" Anna looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Sophia. She took the offered hand and straightened her spine just a little. "I'm ready," she said, her voice slightly stronger than before. As Sophia led Anna into the training area, she touched the chain at her throat and thought of all the women who had worn it before her, all the struggles they had overcome, all the strength they had found in themselves when the world tried to break them. The chain had been broken once, but it had been repaired, and the break had become part of its story, not a weakness, but a testament to resilience. In the end, that Thursday morning in the gymnasium hadn't been about revenge or violence. It had been about transformation, the moment when someone who had been pushed to their breaking point chose to become unbreakable instead. The bullies had thought they were destroying something precious, but instead, they had awakened something powerful. And now, with each student Sophia taught, with each young person who learned to stand tall and refuse to be broken, the legacy continued. Not through an unbroken chain of metal, but through an unbreakable chain of human resilience, passed from one generation to the next. stronger with each link forged in the fires of adversity. The sacred chain had been broken, but what it represented, the strength, the dignity, the refusal to be diminished by those who would try to break you, that could never be destroyed. It lived on in every person who chose to stand up instead of stay down, who chose to protect instead of prey upon others, who understood that true power came not from the ability to break things, but from the strength to rebuild them stronger than before.